A musician,
long-distance kayaker,
a businessman,
she looks after animals,
artist,
author.
We interview remarkable people.
They're talented in so many different areas.
You're listening to The Dialogue.
89.7 FM East Side Radio.
You're listening to 89.7 FM East Side Radio. This is Natasha and The Dialogue Show, where I interview remarkable people. On the show today, I have Kelliegh Jackson, who's the Managing Director of the Veterans Centres Network. Kelliegh, how are you?
I'm fabulous, thanks, Natasha.
Are you? Well, you look very glamorous, I have to say. And I believe that's definitely because you dressed up for my interview. I'm really interested in chatting to you, not only because you've had a really interesting life, but because you're the first woman I've ever known, actually, who's been in the Australian Army. And that, I think, is kind of quite interesting. I would imagine you probably know quite a lot, but how many women are actually in, the percentage-wise, actually are in the Army currently?
I don't have the exact percentage, but I believe it's somewhere between 12 and 15%.
Quite low.
Yes.
It's not a huge amount if you consider that, there's a lot of people, there are a lot of people in there. You've actually been in the Army since you were around about, 18, 19?
So I did my selection when I was 17, and that was in around October, November of 86, and then I shipped off to the Army in January 1987.
And you became a lieutenant.
I did.
So that was, that's kind of, you progressed along, and I was fascinated. I knew nothing about the Army, so it was really interesting actually asking you some of the questions. And you were explaining to me the difference between a commissioned person and an enlisted person, and that there's actually two different options in the Army, and I kind of couldn't get my head around what the difference was. Can you just touch on what the difference between being enlisted and being commissioned is? You were commissioned, yes.
I was, yes. I think, like in any organisation, every job is extremely important. But what we need to do is divide the tasks amongst ourselves according to our particular gifts and skills. And so I'm not a highly technical person. And so the enlisted personnel that I worked with, because my corps is Royal Australian Electrical Mechanical Engineers, a fabulous group of enlisted personnel who were the tradespersons, I suppose, if I can explain it in sort of layman's terms. And then my role as a general service officer was to ensure the command and leadership, so to coordinate the overall sort of human resource management leadership tasks, to inspire them to want to come to work and to feel comfortable at work, and to make sure that all of those additional elements, such as their pay and trade requirements, were all, satisfied, so that they could concentrate on the job that they needed to do.
So does a commissioned person look after an enlisted person?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Right. So the commissioned people are like the bosses.
Well, actually, I felt I felt the enlisted personnel actually looked after me.
Right. And in enlisted, you get so they're different names. So if you go in as a sort of, a beginning person, you're called a private.
A private or a craftsman. In my corps, it was a craftsman.
Okay, private or a craftsman. And then you get a corporal.
Yes.
And then from there you get a sergeant.
Yes.
And then what do you get after a sergeant?
A warrant officer class 2.
Okay, and then?
A warrant officer class 1. See, you know so much about it already, Natasha.
I know, that's just from talking to you, and I've got it all written down. And then after that, so what is the top that you can get into? What is the top sort of prize section that, if the Army was going to be your core calling for the rest of your life, where would you want to be in the end?
I tell you what, my favourite job ever was to be a platoon commander, and that was as a lieutenant.
Okay, and what do you do when you're a platoon commander?
So when you're a platoon commander, like a section corporal, that's the opportunity to command the greatest number of troops and to have the closest relationship with your troops possible. The higher you elevate, the further you get away from the people.
So let's go back. You were born in Townsville, and you've got 2 siblings, a brother and a sister.
Well, actually, I have 3.
Oh, 3. Right. We only touched on the 2, the younger ones. So there's 4 of you altogether.
Yeah. So I have a sister from my father's first marriage, who I've just wonderfully reconnected with after many, many, many years.
Oh, that's exciting.
It was very exciting, Tony. And then I have my sister, who was from my father and mother's union, Michelle. And then I have my younger brother, who came along sometime later.
But you spent quite a lot of your time in boarding schools. Actually, I mean, from a very tender age of 4.
I did.
Why was that?
So I was very young, so I'm not really sure of, the specifics or the circumstances, because as you can imagine, these things are very difficult for family to speak of. My father actually committed suicide when I was 4 years old, and leaving my mother with a 4 and a 2-year-old, and back that many years ago, there weren't that many supports from the government in place to assist single parents. And so Mum had to cope with a husband who'd just suicided, and literally everything was tied up. So she handed me over to, the Anglican nuns.
What was that like?
I actually have some very vivid memories of that time. We had a snack area, so your parents would send you biscuits and lollies, and they're all stored. And apparently there was one girl who was sleepwalking and going and eating them all. And, we used to sing songs and say prayers. And then at the end of that, we were allowed to tell ghost stories. Well, I was 4 years old, so you can imagine the effect
How
ghost
terrifying.
stories had on me. So I'd go and crawl into bed with the house mistress, as a 4-year-old would do.
Well, that's a good story, not a negative one. You had quite an interesting relationship with your mother. Obviously, quite a tumultuous relationship with her, which kind of had you at home and then back in boarding school and then at home and, backwards and forwards. Did that sort of push you towards wanting to leave home early?
Yeah, most definitely. The third boarding school I went to in year 11 and 12, that was upon my instigation, and it was a really difficult decision for me to make, because I felt so responsible for my younger sister, and then also by this stage my younger brother, who was probably about 18 months old at the time. And but I just felt that I wouldn't survive. I really felt just so desperate, and so I begged to go. And then after I finished my year 11 and 12, and I didn't really do that well.
Yes, you said school wasn't your thing, really.
Well, yes, and I don't know why. Maybe I thought I was stupid and therefore didn't really apply myself. But I used to play 2 musical instruments, and I did very well with that, but it wasn't my passion. And then in the second term of the first year I was at school, I ditched my music, or the second half, and I started playing sport. And I really loved that. And I joined the rowing team, and, I walked away with, as state champion in a couple of events. And I really enjoyed that sense of achievement.
You've gone on throughout your military career, your army career. You've studied extensively. So you just rattle off a few of those qualifications that you've managed to achieve.
Well, I've achieved all of that in the last 12 years. So when I came back to Army 12 years ago, my kids were young, and I was a single mum by this stage. I had some massive jobs, but I couldn't watch TV every night, and I really I knew that one day my children would leave home, and I really wanted to prepare myself for something exciting. So I started studying, and I finished now a Masters of International Law, and I've got one subject left to finish in a double Masters in Human Resources and Industrial Relations. And last year I graduated from a graduate certificate in coaching psychology, which I just thoroughly enjoyed.
So despite the fact that school wasn't amazing for you and you had this quite challenging upbringing with quite a lot of loss and quite a lot of separation, did you find that the army provided you with a sense of family, a sense of home? Was that something that maybe they delivered for you?
Yes, definitely. I think traditionally, I'm not sure now, and this is my opinion only. I think traditionally we did recruit a lot of people who are looking for a place to belong, a higher purpose, a group to, of like-minded individuals. And I think that's every industry. We gravitate towards people who have similar personalities. So I gravitated towards the Army. I really didn't know what I was in for. And, I turned up in a pink silk dress with bright red hair. I don't naturally have red hair, and a massive smile on my face. And there's all these people yelling at you, marching around, with strange sticks and saying all sorts of things. Like if I didn't keep my hands by my side, they were going to rip them off, stick them in my ears and ride me around like a motorcycle. Now, I just thought that was hilarious. But of course, now I'm laughing with my mouth open. So then, of course, was the next joke about what they would do should I not close my mouth.
Right.
So, for me, even though my officer training was extremely difficult and there were a lot of challenges, there's a lot of pain, it was a lot of fun. I got to shoot all of these weapons, ride around in a tank. I actually got to drive a tank. And I was with a whole bunch of young people who were sort of in the same situation. And because we had so much to do, it was like a constant game, sometimes an unpleasant game, but it was a constant challenge. Get your uniform right, make your bed, clean your room, get to this lesson, march this way, do the obstacle course.
What you see is true. I mean, we see this on movies and all the rest of it, and we think, oh, they're hamming it up. But that pressure to be perfect and to also conform must be quite heightened. I mean, because it's all about conforming, isn't it? I
Absolutely.
mean, you all have to be the same.
Yep.
Is that hard as a woman to suddenly fit into an environment where your whole life you've sort of been told to stand out, and then all of a sudden they're saying to you, no, fit in.
Look, I think coming from my childhood, I was expected to conform. My mum, from my perspective, was a control freak, and so I was already conditioned to conform. So it was quite easy in a way to conform, but I have this inner rebellion, and my father's sort of entrepreneurial side, so I was always in trouble for having messy hair, and I'd go out on a Friday night if I was allowed, and I'd Saturday morning turn up for training. I still have makeup on and blue eyeliner back in those days, so and I think that's one of the reasons why perhaps, being in the Defence Force towards the end was really unpleasant for me, because I just saw no sense in conforming.
When you started, you said you came from a very small town, from a small place. There didn't seem like too many options for you. So the Army seemed like, a great place that you could go and maybe spread your wings. How many other women started with you?
So I think from memory, and maybe the other girls can correct me, but I think we were the third class of females to go through Duntroon. So there used to be Portsea, which was 1 year, and Duntroon, which was the degree course. They'd be there 4 years. And then they built the Defence Force Academy, the Tri-Service Academy. So they closed Portsea and then reduced the time spent at Duntroon. So Duntroon was all male.
Okay.
Prior to this.
So how many women do you think were with you?
I think I started with another about 19 other girls. So I think it was about 120 to 20.
The rate of females sort of dropping out of the Army is quite high. Is there a particular reason for that? I mean, obviously it's a really gender-biased environment. It can't be anything but a gender-biased environment. I mean, it came from a masculine background. It's continued through a masculine background. Women like you go in to try and break those stereotypes because you obviously believe that, you can. But let's look at it. I mean, it's 2018, and I don't think that you can really say we've made massive leaps and strides. We're not, there's not a huge amount of women. So I suppose my question to you is, having gone through this for, nearly 19 years in total on and off, how do you think the Army's going in terms of integrating women and their attitudes to women in that space?
Look, I think the Defence Force or Army...
is it the Defence Force or is it the Army? Am I referring to it incorrectly?
No, I just want to I suppose I'm including all of the other services. So, I think the Defence Force as an industry, if we can call it that, or as a job, career, a vocation, just like any other industry, is having similar challenges. And I think this is really part of our story, as an Australian community. We're seeing this in America, we're seeing it in Australia. There's a lot of industries that are being really challenged about their culture and, are they really diverse, and are they really, non-gender biased? And, I think Australia and the world is going through a tumultuous period of examining what they've done and has it worked and where to next. And I think, from my perspective, it's all about balance. And, by having more women sitting on boards, by having more women participating in the decision making, I just think we get, more colourful outcomes. I just think we get better outcomes. If there's just women sitting at the table, I don't think you get as good an outcome as if you have men and women sitting at the table. It's like in my home with myself and my 2 teenage boys. I really like to, and from a very young age, involve them in the discussion and the decision making. Ultimately, the buck stops with me. I make the decision. However, by including them, one, they will embrace the decision in a better manner, and 2, I get a different perspective by listening to the world and seeing the world through somebody else's eyes. So it's hard for me to answer, is the Army, sort of more improving? Look, I think we are, but I think we have a long way to go.
So obviously one of the other things that we've come across and we've heard of in the media quite a lot is obviously not only the gender bias and the stereotyping, but also the bullying, the incredible overriding bullying, that male bullying mentality that has really affected women. Now, I'm of the view, and I might be wrong, that every human being can create themselves into a victim at different times of their lives, whether you're a woman or a man, it makes no difference. And so you have to take some of that with, a measure of thought. But you've come out of this experience. Did you find that there was a bullying culture? Did you fall susceptible to that?
I'm not going to say there was a bullying culture, because I've thought about this a lot, and having been subjected to some unpleasant behaviours. I love the Army, and I love what the Defence Force stands for, and I think it's a really great institution. I think where we fall down, and this is across humanity, is when the 5% of people who don't know how to behave appropriately or let their ego override good decision making, ethics, principles, values. I think that's where we fall foul. And and I have a business partner, Laura. We've got another business that we're working on, and we tried to present to businesses about this. So I don't think addressing the bullying is the problem, because if people are going to behave badly, they're going to do it no matter what you say. But if we can teach the other 95% of people how to identify it, how to avoid it, how to protect themselves, and we actually have built these personal protective tools, and we call it there was a book actually written many years ago called The Art of Verbal Self-Defense. So we really try and teach people, the 95% of people who do know how to behave appropriately, how to respond. So I won't say that there's a bullying culture. What I would say is I have been in that situation. It's extremely unpleasant. It's frustrating. It's heartbreaking. But I would say I can't blame the Defence Force for that. That's individuals.
It's a human thing.
It's a human thing. But what I will say is that when other people stand aside and know that it's happening, to me that just makes them as bad as the other person. And I can understand it is difficult to stand up and to say something, because you don't want to become a target either. But the only way that we stop the 5%, because that's all it is the 95% stand up and make sure that they, stomp on it.
So let's talk a little bit about what a veteran is, because obviously, as the managing director of the Veteran Centres Network, which is a bit of a mouthful, what does that actually do, and how, what job is that?
Okay, so just to answer your question about a veteran is anybody who's served a day in the Defence Force.
So they don't have to all be very old people with lots of medals, which is what my idea of a veteran was, or people in America who've got, who've come back shattered and broken.
No, a veteran is anybody who's made that decision to devote themselves for a period of time to the defence of the nation, and it's a really selfless act to do that.
You said that when I mentioned PTSD, and I said that obviously we don't go into combat as much as maybe an American nation does, or maybe Southern European one does. So do we have that as an issue? And you fascinatingly said that the Army and the Defence Force, and they spend all their time getting you ready for an experience you're not going to be shocked by. So ideally you are going through that experience anyway, even though it hasn't really happened to you. So do you find that in the Army we have some, we have mental illness, and we have, that suicide issue from people who are kind of almost subjecting themselves to experiences they're not really having, but are having this sort of mirrored PTSD?
Look, that's a huge question. I sat on the Prime Minister's National Mental Health Commission review into suicide services, and it was really interesting to see how a group of highly qualified medical people looked at this, and researchers, and it's something I've looked at in my dissertation. And the way that I see it is you get recruited because of a particular personality style that you have, and because not everybody passes the test to be recruited. So if you don't have that personality style, then you're not going to be recruited. They recruit you, then they send you off to training. They isolate you from everything else that you've ever known, and rightly so. And they want you to concentrate on the job at hand. And you do repetitive training tasks so that they become instinctive. And I'm talking very generalised about this across the Defence Force because, depending on what job you do, you get quite different training. But initial training is pretty much all the same. And then once you graduate and you've been sort of super glued to this group of people that you've done your training with, then you leave and you enter a culture that reinforces that training and reinforces that group institutionalized mentality. And then we exercise and we train, and we exercise and we train, and we exercise and we train, and we live within a culture where we're constantly preparing for an event. And it's like what a psychologist might talk about with regards to anxiety. People who worry about stuff, the psychologist might say, oh, why would you worry about it? Because it may as well happen anyway, because you're experiencing all of the same emotions. So in a snapshot, we recruit people with a particular personality style. We train them to respond in particular ways. We put them in a culture that reinforces that response, and then potentially they go off and they, participate in an operation and, experience subjected to, are immersed in, things that not the everyday population are immersed in. That has an effect on you, and that exacerbates over time. Does that mean that our Defence Force personnel have mental illness? No, I think it just means that they are highly trained for a particular type of job, and they have a particular personality type. IT people have a particular personality.
So in terms of the veterans, what do we do for our veterans? I mean, what do we have set up that supports them?
Look, there's a lot out there. The Aspen report spoke about quite a lot of hundreds and thousands of ex-service organisations, or organisations that say, that either their primary or secondary, or one of their missions is to assist veterans or veterans' families. There's a lot of organisations out there. We have Department of Veteran Affairs, which are going through a transformation to try and, make sure that they are more veteran-centric. I think they still have a long way to go, but, they're making progress. I think the Defence Force itself needs to, look at that cause and effect. And, you know, we have legacy, we've got the RSL, Return and Services League, then the organisation that I work for, the RSL and Services Clubs Association. So clubs and RSL sub-branches are separate here in New South Wales. So basically in my job as the Managing Director of the Veteran Centre Network, what we've identified is that somebody needs to coordinate, you know, the magnitude of those services to assist people to reduce the complexity of that environment. So we have university qualified caseworkers who will interview somebody, a family member or a veteran. They may only need a little bit of help, but they may need a lot of help. And if you have to go and talk to 20 different organisations to get some assistance, that's overwhelming, particularly somebody who's, you know, really doesn't understand it. I understand it quite well. So bringing that together.
So we're coming to the end of the interview. In fact, we have a minute. And I want to ask you a question. I know that you obviously you were discharged from the army, and you want to attend the Invictus Games, and that you've tried to set up a team and, you know, cycle and do all of these things as part of that. Is that still going ahead?
Unfortunately, no. So I applied for the Invictus Games. I was lucky enough to go and compete in the US Marine Corps Warrior Games trials. I came away with a gold medal for cycling and 2 gold medals for rowing and a bronze medal in running and a bronze medal in swimming. But 3 days after I came back, I unfortunately received a letter from the Invictus Games selectors and said I wouldn't be going forward with the Invictus Games. Now, I think Invictus Games is a fabulous opportunity. I'm just a little sad that, you know, there's only 72 spots, and with 200 people